The war had changed everything for the Pevensey children. London, once filled with laughter and comfort, had now become a dangerous place. Bombs fell from the sky, and their mother decided it was safer for them to leave. Peter, the eldest, carried the weight of responsibility, while Susan tried to keep things proper and calm. Edmund, often sulking and stubborn, felt left out and resentful. Lucy, the youngest, full of imagination and innocence, carried a quiet hope that adventure might find her in the countryside. They arrived at a large, mysterious mansion owned by an old professor, whose strange manners and grand house fascinated them. The house was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was filled with endless hallways, hidden corners, and rooms stacked with books, wardrobes, and curious treasures. Rainy days gave them no choice but to explore. As they played hide and seek, Lucy stumbled into a spare room with nothing in it but an old wardrobe. Drawn to it, she pushed the heavy wooden doors open and stepped inside. At first, all she felt were fur coats brushing against her face and arms. She pushed further, expecting to feel the back of the wardrobe, but instead her hands touched icy air. She stepped forward and suddenly felt snow crunching beneath her shoes. Her breath clouded in front of her, and she realized she was no longer in the professor's house but standing in the middle of a winter forest. Trees stood tall, their branches heavy with snow, and a lamppost glowed gently nearby. Amazed and trembling with wonder, Lucy walked deeper into the strange land. It was there she met Mr. Tumnus, a fawn with the legs of a goat, a tail, and small curling horns on his head. He carried packages wrapped in paper, clearly startled to see a human child. Yet he quickly grew kind and invited her to his little home for tea. Inside his cozy cave, with the fire burning and food on the table, Lucy felt welcome. Tumnus played his flute, and she drifted into dreams of forests and dancing creatures. But the warmth was broken when Tumnus confessed a terrible truth. He admitted he had been ordered to capture any human who entered Narnia and deliver them to the White Witch, the self-proclaimed queen of the land. She had cast a spell over Narnia, making it always winter but never Christmas. Yet Tumnus could not betray Lucy. With tears in his eyes, he begged her forgiveness and guided her safely back to the lamppost. Lucy hurried through the wardrobe, her heart pounding, and suddenly she was back in the spare room, no time seeming to have passed at all. Excited, she ran to her brothers and sister, breathless as she told them of the magical land she had discovered. But they only laughed. To them, it was just a story, a dream spun from her imagination. Still, Lucy knew what she had seen was real, and in her heart, she longed to return. Lucy tried again and again to convince her siblings about Narnia, but her excitement was met with doubt and teasing. Peter and Susan exchanged worried looks, wondering if their little sister's imagination had gotten the better of her. Edmund, however, knew Lucy was telling the truth. He had also slipped into the wardrobe one day, though what he found was quite different. Instead of meeting a friendly fawn, he had encountered the White Witch herself. She was tall and striking, with pale skin and cold beauty, dressed in shimmering white robes. She rode in a sleigh pulled by reindeer, and when she saw Edmund, she treated him with dangerous kindness. With a honeyed voice, she asked questions about his family, and when she learned he had siblings, she smiled in a way that made him uneasy. Offering him enchanted Turkish delight, she promised that if he brought his brother and sisters to her, she would make him a prince. Even a king. Greedy for more sweets and flattered by her promises, Edmund kept the meeting a secret from the others. It was not long before all four children found themselves pushed into Narnia together. They had been hiding from visitors in the professor's house, ducking into the wardrobe to avoid being discovered, and before they realized it, the coats gave way to icy branches and a snowy ground beneath their feet. Lucy was overjoyed. At last, they would all see for themselves that she had spoken the truth. She eagerly led them to Mr. Tumnus's home, but when they arrived, his little cave was ransacked and empty. A note left behind revealed he had been arrested for treason against the witch, accused of helping a human girl escape. Lucy's heart sank, tears welling in her eyes, but before despair could overwhelm her, a pair of talking beavers appeared from the trees. They introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and insisted that the children follow them to safety. In their snug dam, warmed by a crackling fire, the beavers explained that the appearance of the four siblings had been foretold. They spoke of Aslan, the great lion and true king of Narnia, who had returned after many long years. His coming would bring hope, and with the help of the children, the witch's reign could be ended. Lucy and Peter listened with awe, while Susan remained cautious, her practical mind struggling to believe in prophecy. Edmund sat apart from them, his face clouded with thoughts he did not share. The beavers spoke with urgency, warning them that the witch already knew of their arrival. It was not safe to linger. They must journey to meet Aslan. That night, while the others whispered with hope and fear, Edmund quietly slipped away. Drawn by, the beavers hurried the children along the snowy paths of Narnia, urging them to move quickly, for the witch's spies were everywhere. The land seemed alive with whispers of danger, from the flutter of wings above to the crunch of unseen paws in the distance. Lucy clutched Susan's hand, while Peter tried to look brave though fear gnawed at him. They pressed on until a strange and wonderful sight filled the air with joy. A sleigh appeared, but instead of the witch, it carried Father Christmas. His arrival was a sign that the witch's spell was weakening. He smiled warmly at the children, declaring that Aslan was on the move. From his sack, he brought gifts meant not for play but for battle and responsibility. To Peter, he gave a shining sword and shield, the weapons of a true leader. To Susan, he entrusted a bow and arrows with a magical horn that would bring help whenever blown. To Lucy, he offered a small vial of healing cordial and a dagger, so that even the smallest among them could protect and restore. Each child felt the weight of these gifts, realizing they were no longer mere children caught in a story, they were part of something far greater. Meanwhile, Edmund trudged deeper into the witch's icy domain. The grand castle loomed with towers like jagged spears of ice, and its gates were guarded by strange stone creatures frozen mid-movement. At first he thought them statues, but soon he realized they were once living beings, turned to stone by the witch's wand. His unease grew, yet pride and hunger for power drove him on. When he finally stood before the witch, she was not as gentle as before. Her voice was sharp, her eyes cold, and her smile gone. She scolded him for arriving without his siblings, for it was all of them she desired. The Turkish delight no longer seemed sweet but sickened his stomach, and the grand promises felt more like chains than rewards. Still, he stayed, trapped by his own choices and the witch's threat. The other three children, guided by the beavers, traveled for days until they reached a wide open field where tents were pitched and banners waved in the wind. There, they finally beheld Aslan, the great lion. His mane shone golden in the sunlight, his presence filled with strength, yet also with kindness that melted fear from their hearts. When Peter stepped forward to speak with him, he felt both small and honored, as if standing before something ancient and eternal. Aslan welcomed them with a voice deep as thunder but warm as a father's embrace. Though Susan still doubted and Lucy trembled, they felt safe at last. But shadows loomed even here. The witch was gathering her forces, and Edmund was still her prisoner. Peter wrestled with his doubts, unsure whether he had the courage to lead, but Aslan's steady gaze reminded him that true strength was not in crowns or swords. It was in sacrifice, in standing firm when all hope seemed lost. The journey ahead would test them all. Edmund was rescued from the witch's clutches by Aslan's followers, pulled away from the frozen walls of her castle under the cover of courage and loyalty. When he was brought to Aslan's camp, his siblings embraced him, though Peter's relief was tempered with the anger of betrayal. Lucy forgave him quickly, her heart too soft to hold resentment, while Susan's silence spoke both of worry and disappointment. Yet Aslan, with eyes full of wisdom, looked upon Edmund not as a traitor but as a boy who had stumbled and learned. With quiet words, he assured the siblings that what was past was forgiven, though none were to speak of it again. Still, the shadow of the witch lingered, and her presence soon pierced the hopeful air of the camp. The White Witch arrived boldly, dressed in glittering white, her sleigh drawn to a halt before Aslan's tent. Her voice rang cold as she declared her claim over Edmund's life. She reminded all of the deep magic written at the dawn of time, a law that could not be broken. Traitors, she said, belonged to her, and by that right, Edmund must die. The Narnians trembled, for her words carried power and truth. Peter's hand tightened on his sword, but even he knew force could not undo the law. Silence fell as Aslan stepped forward, towering above her, his mane flowing like a golden river in the wind. He spoke to her in a low voice, leading her aside where none could hear. Their conversation was brief but heavy, and when they returned, the witch's face twisted in triumph. She agreed to leave, satisfied, but the look in Aslan's eyes carried a sorrow the children did not understand. That night, the camp celebrated Edmund's return, but Aslan seemed apart, pacing in the shadows with a weight none could share. When the others finally slept, Susan and Lucy noticed him slipping away into the night. Quietly, they followed. They watched as the mighty lion, who had seemed unshakable, moved with slow, heavy steps. His great mane drooped, and his eyes glistened with a grief that pierced their hearts. They clung to him, begging to know what troubled him, but he only asked them to follow as far as they could. At last, he reached the stone table, a great slab of ancient power, where the witch and her army awaited. The sight was terrible. Creatures of darkness, ghouls, and wolves, shrieking with cruel joy. The witch bound Aslan with chains, though he made no resistance. They cut his mane, mocking him, spitting upon him, laughing at the fallen king. Susan and Lucy wept silently, their hearts breaking as they hid in the shadows. The witch lifted her cruel blade and declared that the deep magic would be satisfied. With one swift stroke, Aslan was slain upon the stone table. The ground trembled, the night grew colder, and the world seemed to fall into despair. The witch's army roared in triumph, convinced nothing now could stop them. Alone, and grief-stricken, Lucy and Susan crept to Aslan's still body, laying across his form in sorrow, not knowing that the story of Narnia was far from over. The dawn came quietly, the first rays of sun brushing across the battlefield where only silence and sorrow remained. Lucy and Susan, exhausted from their grief, still lay near Aslan's lifeless body. The stone table stood cold and unmoving, a monument to what they believed was defeat. But as the sky brightened, a sound like cracking thunder split the air. The stone table had broken in two, and where Aslan's body had lain, there was now nothing but emptiness. The girls turned in shock, and before them stood Aslan himself, alive, his mane shining with light more radiant than before. Their tears of sorrow turned to tears of joy as he explained what had happened. The witch had called upon the deep magic, the law that demanded the life of any traitor. But she had not known the deeper magic, written before time itself, which said that if an innocent willingly died in the place of a traitor, death itself would be reversed. Aslan had conquered death, and with a roar that shook the earth, he declared the true battle was about to begin. With Susan and Lucy clinging to his mane, Aslan raced across Narnia faster than the wind, carrying them to the witch's castle. There, he breathed upon the stone statues, and one by one they returned to life. Lions stretched, giants shook the dust from their limbs, and birds took flight once again. An army of the witch's victims had been restored, their loyalty burning brighter than ever. Aslan gathered them and led them toward the battlefield where Peter, Edmund, and the Narnians faced the witch's forces. The fight was already raging. Peter, wielding his sword and shield, battled bravely against the witch's soldiers, though they were many and fierce. Susan fired arrows into the fray, her horn sounding to summon aid, while Lucy rushed to the fallen, using her healing cordial to restore the wounded. Edmund, once the weakest among them, now fought with a courage born of redemption. He pushed through the chaos and struck at the witch herself, shattering her wand with a fierce blow. The witch screamed in fury, her greatest weapon gone, and for a moment the tide of the battle shifted. Yet still, she fought on with terrible strength, her blade clashing against Peter's as he struggled to hold her back. Then Aslan appeared. His roar silenced the battlefield, his presence scattering the witch's army in fear. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with terror, but there was no escape. With one leap, Aslan struck her down, ending her reign of endless winter once and for all. The Narnians erupted in cries of victory, their joy echoing across the land as the snow began to melt, giving way to spring. Peace returned, and at Cair Paravel, the four children were crowned before a cheering crowd. Peter became Peter the Magnificent, Susan the Gentle, Edmund the Just, and Lucy the Valiant. They ruled wisely for many years, their names sung across Narnia in songs of glory. Yet one day, while chasing a white stag in the forest, they stumbled once more through the wardrobe and found themselves back in the professor's house, children again, as if no time had passed at all. But deep in their hearts, they carried Narnia forever, knowing they would one day return.